Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my new studio. This is actually a barn that we have here at the house that I don't use, but I figured it could be a cool space to record and give you my musings. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about two things: uh, the culture war and being literate. Last week, I wrote up and posted two Substacks. One was about the sacking of Dr. Jen Frey at the University of Tulsa Honors Program, and a follow-up stack I did on the 1941 syllabus of W.H. Auden when he taught a class at the University of Michigan. And if you've seen it, I'll include a link to both the picture of the syllabus, but it's in my Substack. And if you take a look at the syllabus, it is for one term, and it is a bang, bang, bang list of must-reads according to Auden in the specific register of modern alienation. And he takes it as an opportunity to essentially give you a hop, skip, and jump through much of the tradition. Going all the way back to the Greek and Roman classics, all the way up through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance and Enlightenment, all the way up until modern times. And the syllabus makes even those of us who read and write for a living chuckle a little bit because it is ambitious, shall we say. I think someone on the internet I saw tallied it up. It's about 6,000 pages of reading, and that's just for the primary sources. He gives you a list of sort of main secondary sources, things like Matthew Arnold and I think Eric Auerbach and a couple of other these big, massive cultural commentators. And so it's substantial. And it occurred to me that a syllabus like that would never be countenanced in 2025. Even at our most elite institutions, an ambitious syllabus like that would be chopped up into, I don't know, how many different semesters worth of classes, even for a major class. So it just wouldn't happen. And I would argue that this is on purpose. That what was considered ambitious in 1941, not even 100 years later, would be considered asinine and maybe even delusional. And so for me, the question remains like, well, why? What happened that a highly literate man like W.H. Auden, a poet and a writer, would prescribe such an amazing reading list for, I believe it was a freshman or sophomore class? And why is it that that was considered, doable, even if a little bit much, to now it is considered by most of us as laughable? And for me, it's not laughable because it's not good. It's laughable because, well, as you can hear the cry from the faculty lounge, that's impossible. They're just going to read the Spark Notes, or they're just going to grok it or chat it or what have you. And they're not wrong. But how do we get to this point where even an English major who in theory wants to study these works, wants to be part of this living tradition, looks at a list like this and considers it completely ridiculous? And my argument is that the what passes for literacy is pretty piss poor relative to what passed for aspirationally literate in 1941. And not only would the sheer volume count be considered absurd, but it's also my sense is that it would be considered um, almost unseemly to make it so, Eurocentric or um, white hetero, white hetero cis patriarchal in nature, and that kind of ideology which has come to dominate the academy, and of course what dominates the academy trickles down to the high school level, which then trickles down to the middle school level and the elementary school level, is that we are in this weird place where we have access to all of those things at the touch of a finger. I can take my phone right now. It's not so I can take my phone right now, which is recording this, so I don't have it in my hands, and I can have immediate access to all of the PDFs of all of these things, and 2 and 3 and 4 times that amount. And yet, in this time of hyper access, we find ourselves in the strange position of not being willing to, as they say, do the work. And why is that? What passes for literacy today? Part of this is um, we are more distracted. We have more distraction at our fingertips. We can go on our phone and get to the bottom of our day and not even come close to scratching the surface of what is available on the internet. But why have we forsaken this stuff? And I would say that in order to engage in a syllabus like Auden's 1941 syllabus, you have to have the desire to do it in the first place, but you also have to have a kind of habit of being that would allow you to take on such a seemingly impossible task. I myself was looking through some old syllabi from the coursework that I took in the mid 90s for undergraduate work at Thomas More College, and even a lower level course called Ritual and Community. And I can put the link to that syllabus, or the picture of that syllabus will be below here too. Would just be was truly a remarkable experience that I had in the mid 90s, and one in which no one would dare do now. We just don't have the capacity, it would seem, or the desire to tackle such greatness, such depth. Now, the other part of that is that the value of these great works, and I'm not talking about the capital G, capital B great books. I'm not working from a sort of a specific set list. I'm talking about old books just in general, this large inheritance that we have access to technically, but we do not seem to have access to it affectively. We do not have access to it in terms of the level of desire. We seem to have been groomed to go in the opposite direction. That many of our students simply do not come with the sort of the deep background, these habits of reading, these habits of being that would allow a syllabus like that to open up. And I think that this is criminal, uh, that the guardians of culture, such as it is, and have fallen asleep on the job. And of course, it's not just the fault of college professors. I will certainly they are part of this new reality, but our technologies have cannibalized us in such a way that even an ambitious student working on his or her own would just be swimming in the impossibility of this syllabus. And yet, from my perspective, me and my classmates in 1992 and 93 and 94 and 95 were in fact capable of much more. In fact, our expectations spoke for themselves. None of us complained that it was stupid. We may have complained that we were running out of time to get 150 pages of the Brothers Karamazov done for Tuesday afternoon. We may have groused that how does one read 50 pages of Aristotle's Politics or Nicomachean Ethics or the Laws of the Republic. We might struggle to sort of get that done, but none of us felt that this was work that was unworthy of our time and attention. And yet, one gets the distinct sense that no one seems to think that this kind of work is worth their time and attention. And part of that is perhaps our cult of efficiency, our cult of use versus good. So there's been a shift in values that has occurred. And I wonder what the downstream costs of this will be. And so that takes me to the situation at the University of Tulsa. Full disclosure, I do not know Dr. Frey. I follow her on Twitter. I have listened to her podcast, The Sacred and Profane. I have read her essays in journals, and I think the world of her. I think she's a first-rate academic. And in one video which I watched, she talks really movingly about coming to the great works um, sort of innocently. She goes to college and she did not come from a kind of church background or anything like that. But it was in reading Augustine's Confessions that she felt convicted that Augustine, and then everything that Augustine sits upon, and everything that Augustine inspires down the line, was not only worthy of her intellectual pursuits, but she found in these works a real transformation of person. It even led to her eventual conversion as a Catholic. But anyway, that's not really where I want to go right now. The point is that she was converted in a way by a sincere encounter with a sincere professor, with a sincere writer like Augustine of Hippo. And this ancient book that is what I believe was written in 400s, this ancient book was so alive, became so present to her, and like Augustine, this idiom of friendship opened up for her. And so, at any rate, she was lured away from a position at the University of South Carolina, a tenure position at the University of South Carolina, to run and refound the University of Tulsa Honors Program. And by all markers, she was extremely successful. She's an attractive person, both intellectually and the normal way that we would use that word. She's not sour. She is, we might even say, winsome. And because she came to this job seemingly from a position of love, she was ready to share what she had gotten from her professors and her sincere engagement with these great works. She brought that and sought to bring that to the next generation, a real teacher's heart. And like I said, she was incredibly successful. There was grant money coming in. There was, I think, a 400 or 500% increase in enrollment for that particular program. And a new provost comes in and basically removes her. Now, she still has a job in the philosophy department, so there's that. But there's this sort of underlying question of, well, what happened? What's going on? And I have my own theories, none of which are particularly charitable to those people who would come in and destroy the work that she was doing. Uh, just making sure it was recording. Yes, it's recording. But they unceremoniously took her off the job, as it were. And, again, I don't know her, and I'm not trying to get her into any kind of trouble. I'm just a watcher I'm monitoring the situation, as we like to say on the socials. And in my monitoring of the situation, it seems to me like this was not just a stupid move on the part of the university, but it was a malignant one. In other words, the kind of success that Dr. Frey was having, the kind of winning attitude, and all of the various markers that follow winning in this context, suggested that sacking her, taking her off of the job, was short-sighted. My argument is that it was not short-sighted, that this is probably done on purpose. As a veteran of graduate school, I know the kind of pettiness, the kind of attitudes that can swarm around these departments, and perhaps um, those that were around at the University of Tulsa did not want to win quite that way. And so um, I know a lot of people do not like chatter about, the culture war. I know that a lot of people find the analogy to be disquieting. But I would submit to you that the culture war doesn't care what you think about the culture war. The culture war, which is ultimately a war about the future, who owns the future? Well, the culture war doesn't care about you, but it certainly cares about your work. And it's extremely frustrating for someone who has dedicated my life to the teaching of literature and history and philosophy and theology, um, that um, a successful endeavor like the University of Tulsa honors program can be so unceremoniously kneecapped right as it is catching momentum and growing. And so, what does this mean for those of us who are more, sort of small t traditionally minded? Is that one wonders if any of these institutions are ultimately salvageable, because I would love for somebody just to sort of come out and say, well, what exactly was wrong with what Dr. Frey was trying to accomplish? What did she do? And look, maybe it'll come out that there was some, financial mismanagement. I don't think that's the case, but it's possible. And so I'm looking forward to being corrected in my take here. But what I suspect is that there are those people, and this is sort of the irony of ironies, but there are those people who exist on college faculty and college administrations who actually don't want their students to engage in the tradition. That they want to engage in this sort of hyper modern and postmodern leveling of anything that has been received, right? This perennial attempt on the part of Marxist professors or postmodernist professors to establish a kind of year zero in which, not on their watch will some poor unsuspecting young undergrad encounter Augustine qua Augustine, to encounter Shakespeare as Shakespeare. Oh, no, no, no. We can't have that. What we really need is that any kind of engagement with these works has to come heavily framed with big asterisks on it, saying that this is the work of a different time, that this work is ultimately dangerous, that it reinscribes the narratives of dominance and colonialism upon a new generation. And I do suspect that that is what is at heart going on here. And so, this is a war. So what are we to do? Um, I suspect that the answer to these kinds of questions, if we at all care about literacy, and I do, you can call me John the Savage from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I care about a world that is literate in that deep, old-fashioned sense. That we somehow need to find a way to connect our young people with a tradition that um, I know for me, fed and built me out as a more deep human being. Why wouldn't we want that for our children? Why wouldn't they want that for their students, other than some kind of ideological motivation that a sincere reading of an Augustine or a Dante or Dostoevsky or Dickens um, is ultimately dangerous? And so, going back to my Auden curriculum, hi Gigi, going back to my Auden curriculum comment, that what they can't abide is a student, is a human being who is deeply informed by the tradition, because there's nothing more problematic, there's nothing more dangerous than wrongthink. And as we all know, Shakespeare will give you wrongthink. Homer will give you wrongthink. Plato will give you wrongthink. Now, for those of us who've read all these different people and their works, you know that there is no hegemony when it comes to comparing, I don't know, Shakespeare with Mary Shelley, or Dostoevsky with Nietzsche. It's not like some sort of political program. It's much more varied, and irony of ironies, it's actually much more diverse. But it's the wrong kind of diversity, intellectual diversity. And so, if we want the next generation to be able to tap into and achieve some kind of mastery at the level of what Auden was looking for, we need to enculturate them into these habits of mind, these habits of being, because if we don't, then we lose it. It has occurred to me that we can choose a kind of new dark ages. And with the advent of the tech revolution and artificial intelligence, with the advent of all of these shortcuts, these life hacks, we run the risk of having access to tons and tons of information, but we have no way of understanding it. And as a longtime high school teacher, I think I'm past 25 years now, I worry that we are all becoming idiots. And I mean idiots in a kind of technical way. We are all becoming private persons, unable to relate to each other, unable to relate to past generations, unable ultimately to even create a new generation. We've become hyper private, hyper individual. And I think that is the nature of the war. That is the nature of the culture war, that the enemy wins when we can't relate. And I know for me, I learned to relate to these old books, which in an interesting and maybe somewhat mysterious way allowed me to relate to myself. It was through that sincere engagement with the tradition that I became to have a sense of myself as a human being, not only as a spectator, but as a participant in this work, in a participant in culture. And so I want to encourage everyone to think through these matters. And what does it mean to be a literate person? And again, you don't have to be, you don't have to have 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 volumes under your belt, but rather some sense that we, all of us sit atop a patrimony that is worth preserving. And it's a patrimony that requires an incarnational sense of being. It's a patrimony that requires not just information on a flash drive, not just a big building with a lot of books. Those are great things, of course, but that the tradition is somehow a living one. If you shoot a flash drive out into, the orbit after the apocalypse in the hopes that, it would somehow be preserved, you're not really thinking through what it means to have a living tradition. And so, in order to preserve that living tradition, I believe we have to be readers. And it doesn't mean you have to be a professional reader. It doesn't mean you have to be a professional professor or a professional teacher or a professional writer. But like, for instance, I know that having Hamlet floating around in my head, having Raskolnikov floating around in my head, having Elizabeth Bennet floating around in my head builds me out as a more full, more alive human being. And there are forces amongst us, those people who are in theory tasked with preserving the tradition, who do not seem to share that wish. They do not share that desire to pass on this shared humanity. So, as I say on X all the time, tole lege, take and read. Take and read, my friends. It's not too late. It's not too late. Cheers. God bless. Like and subscribe. All those sorts of things. Bye now.